Welcome back to the Ualbany Way Wellbeing in You presentation, part three. In the first session, we talked about how your happiness is something in which we sometimes are mislead ourselves into what actually will make us happy, and that we don't always make the right choices regarding what we believe will make us happy and what actually makes us happy. In part two, we started discussing our groundbreaking research that's being done by Martin Seligman and many others in positive psychology. We talked about Martin Seligman's flourish and his 5 steps to well-being: the positive emotion, the engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And now we're going to talk about the way in which Ualbany has taken those 5 well-being elements and embedded them into our paths to happiness and well-being, our Ualbany way. The first one that we're going to talk about is, or the first what I want to talk about is the 5 paths that we've made into mindset, mastery, connection, meaning, and movement. Mindset is associated with engagement in the PERMA model. Mastery is accomplishment. Connection is our positive relationships. Meaning is the same. And movement we've added because of all of the research that talks about the way in which exercise and movement is important to our well-being. So the first one I want to talk about is mindset. That's our first path to health and happiness and from the Ualbany way. And mindset is about developing an attitude or approach to life that focuses on balance, growth, health, prepare students to thrive for the rest of their lives. And mindset is really about the way in which we look at the world. And a growth mindset, which is done by a lot by Carol Dweck and her book Mindset, which is what drives motivation and achievement. And mindset is about the way in which we talk to ourselves and how we believe the things that happen to us are what they are telling us. And a growth mindset is about knowing that if learning is my goal and that effort makes me stronger and that I'm going to spend more time and work harder even amidst failure. A fixed mindset, which is the opposite of a growth mindset, really is talking about the fact that sometimes when I fail at something, that is a evaluation of my talents, not necessarily a learning tool. So if with a fixed mindset, if I'm unable to accomplish something, I'm like, well, I must not be very good at it, so I'm going to stop doing it. And a growth mindset tells me that if I fail at something, it means that I'm not ready yet, and that this has been an evaluation to show me that I just need to work harder and spend a little more time so that I can be stronger. And a growth mindset has been proven to drive motivation and achievement and well-being, that we think of ourselves in a much positive lights when we believe that these evaluations and our failures are not something in which is a judgment of us, but actually is a learning tool. So when you're looking at well-being and when you're looking at your happiness, thinking about how do I have a growth mindset? How can I remind myself that failure or when I don't do as well as I would like is just a way for me to get an assessment and where I am, and that if I work harder, I can accomplish it. Much of this research really is about the 10,000 hour rule that's out there as well. If you've heard about the 10,000 hour, which shows that there always need 10,000 hours to become an expert, and that much of our time we spend thinking we're not very talented at something, when in reality is we just haven't spent the time. For example, if you are someone who says, I can't dance, or I'm not good at math, or I don't know how to draw, most of the time what's happened in your life is that you decided very early that you weren't very talented in those areas. Either because you decided yourself or because someone gave you feedback when you were very young that said, wow, you're not very good at that. And what ends up happening is that we stop doing them. If we don't think that we have any rhythm or dance, then we will never do it for our fear that people will see that we're bad at it. And as a result, you actually become not very good at dance. And the point here is that if you would like to become good at dance, yes, you can. But if you've not done it for 20 years or 10 years, it's going to be harder than for someone who's been practicing all these years because they've been told they were good at it. So it doesn't mean that you're necessarily great at everything, but it does mean that with a growth mindset, if you want to put the time and effort, you can become competent, if not an expert, if you wanted to spend that much time. That understanding of a growth mindset is incredibly important for your success and for your happiness and well-being. Angela Duckworth does a lot of her work on grit through mindset. And her book on grit is about sticking with your future day in and day out, and not just for the week, not for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future your reality. Angela's groundbreaking grit work started with West Point, in which she was asked by the West Point leaders to look at who is successful when they join West Point. West Point has a 6-week summer session, and a number of students will drop out of that West Point right from that 6-week session. And what they were finding is that their candidates, their applications were given a score, and that there was no correlation between who succeeded in that 6-week session and who actually dropped out. Those who got the highest candidate scores going into the thing were just as likely to drop out as those with the lowest scores. And those with the lowest scores were just as likely to remain in the program as those in the highest scores. There seemed to be a randomness to who was successful and who was not, and their candidate scores, which took into account things as their transcripts and their grades and their athletic fitness to start, had no bearing. And what Angela was able to actually prove was that those individuals who scored high on her grit scale, those who had a growth mindset, those who believed if they worked hard they would succeed, were the ones that would stick out the program and be successful. And that the candidate score did not measure their resiliency and their grit. And that grit, the ability to stick with your future, the ability to overcome failure, to see it as a learning opportunity, not as an evaluation, that is the true way in which we are successful. So developing a gritty soul, developing a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. It's important to note that fixed mindsets can often happen in individuals who might have growth mindsets in other areas. That in our lives, you don't just have a growth mindset overall. Oftentimes we have a growth mindset in one area of our life and a fixed mindset in the other. So you constantly have to be looking at the way that you're seeing yourself. Finally, as we talk about growth mindsets and we talk about the way to look at ourselves, I want to talk about multitasking. It's certainly a popular item amongst college students these days about being a good multitasker. And really, the research shows you that multitasking is a lie. And in fact, I have an exercise for you that if you want to use this on your friends, you can, to show and prove that multitasking is impossible. Which is, if you ask one of your friends to recite the alphabet as fast as they can, and then recite the numbers 1 through 26 as fast as they can, they will do so very, very quickly. But then I want you to ask them to now exchange one then the other. So for example, ask them to recite the alphabet and the numbers moving back and forth. So starting with A1, B2, C3, D4, and ask them to do that for as long as they can. What you're going to find in that case is that everyone, yourself or your friends, certainly are unable to continue that exercise very long, that they get slower, they are trying to remember where they are, they lose track. Even though they've proven that they know their alphabet and their numbers and that they can recite them very fastly, they can't do one then the other. The reason for this is because as human beings, we can't multitask. We can't do two things at once. We do something called switch tasking. And switch tasking means that I have to switch from one task to the other. And every time I do, I lose efficiency. So when I'm asking you to go from the alphabet to the numbers, you start losing efficiency every single time you do it, to the point that you actually forget where you were. So this is something in which you can think about is when you're talking about engagement and being engaged and actually being in a mindset to be successful. You can help yourself by limiting your distractions, limiting the amount of times you're trying to do more things at the same time, because doing that is going to make it so that you're less efficient. If you think about whether you're someone who studies with the music on, if you are one of those individuals, you can sometimes find that you're so engrossed in your studying that you're actually going to no longer hear the music. And then maybe your favorite song comes on and all of a sudden you hear it and you remind yourself, wow, I didn't even remember that the music was playing, because somehow you weren't hearing it, because your body had totally focused on one task. And so that if we can limit the distractions, it'll be more focused. When Martin Seligman does his work on engagement, he talks about flow, or being in the zone. And he talks about the way in which we are able to focus on one individual task at a time. And if we have a task that is too easy, we might get bored. If it's too hard, we get frustrated. But if we can find tasks that fit perfectly with our skill sets, then we will get engaged and we will understand that time seems to stop, that we are so engaged we are not even hearing our surroundings. And that experience, that flow, that ability to be engaged in tasks and having a growth mindset, that is actually considered a high level of well-being. And for those of you that have ever been in the zone, whether it's in sports or in studies or in music or in what art or whatever kind of tasks that you like to engage in, those are the times in which we truly feel alive and we have an increased sense of well-being. So to finish off our mindset section for our path, I'm going to give you 5 ways to grow your mindsets. Number 1 is I'd like you to try to keep your mind on one thing at a time, to be truly present and remove distractions. That this ability to focus and keep away from multitasking is a significant part of growing your mindset. Breath awareness, being mindful of your breath. If you have Apple Watch or if you have other apps that talk about your breath, those are important ways for us to become truly present. And taking time for silence. Many of us like to be in places where there's always noise and sound around you. And some of us don't even have the luxury of having places where there's a lot of silence. But trying to find time for silence and being able to explore it and what it means can help you get into that right mindset. And then the last 2 are most importantly about growth mindsets are being aware that failure is required for growth. It is not an evaluation of you as a person. Failure is just giving you feedback. If you are doing something and you are never failing at it, then you're not getting better. You're not growing. It is really important, particularly as a college student, to understand that when I'm in a class that I'm having difficulty in, it's not an evaluation of me. It's actually showing you where I need to work harder and grow. And then remembering that your self-talk does not always tell you the truth, right? We oftentimes, to make mad at ourselves, we tell ourselves that we're bad at something. We tell ourselves that we suck at something or whatever it might be. And in reality, is our own self-talk is creating some obstacles for ourselves. And we can control it, we can stop it, we can change our self-talk, we can refute our self-talk. And these are important parts of growing your mindset. So thank you very much for part 3, and I'll be back with the 4 other parts of our path to health and happiness. Thank you.